Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about anti-Black racism and white supremacy and the way that it goes on within our country and how it connects to our social movement in regards to ICE and their actions. Today's podcast is going to be called Melting Ice by Fire. We're going to go quickly around and introduce ourselves individually. I'll start off. We're all first year master students in the social work program at San Jose State. My name is Amy. I intern at an inpatient psychiatric hospital.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nakam, and I am interning for San Mateo County's Children and Family Services.
My name is Eva, and I am interning at Mount Diablo Unified School District at a middle school's wellness center.
Hi, my name is Trinity. I am currently interning with Pivotal.
Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm interning at Empathy in Action Consulting and working at a middle school in Brentwood, California.
So we've been working as a group over the past month or two, but we've all been in the same class together with Dr. Derek Wang. We've been reading the book My Grandmother's Hands, which broadly talks about white supremacy and how this is within, all American bodies, how anti-Black racism manifests itself. And it's basically a trauma-informed approach. So it's looking at how our bodies internalize it and what are some ways that we can counter it. And that's been kind of one of the biggest topics that's been centering our class. So maybe just to kick it off, what have been some of the most interesting takeaways each of us have had with My Grandmother's Hands?
For me, I really appreciated um, Resma's background into trauma, historical understandings of trauma, how we got here as a society in America. And he really delves into intergenerational trauma and the unprocessed intergenerational trauma that I think is sort of one of the big underpinnings of anti-racism or the underpinnings of racism in America right now. His chapter on talks about the fragility of the white body, and I'd like to read a quote by him that sort of synthesizes this in a really beautiful way. He says, Americans have lived under a strange and contradictory delusion. Black bodies are incredibly strong and frightening and impervious to pain. They can handle anything short of total destruction. But white bodies are extremely weak and vulnerable, especially to Black bodies. So it's the job of the Black bodies to care for white bodies, soothe them, and protect them, particularly from other Black bodies. And I thought that that was a really, really intelligent way of describing uh, my perception in as a white body person. I think why specifically in America, it's really hard for white people to acknowledge racism, the internalized racism, because it requires an understanding of trauma in their own body. Like he talks about being like a defensive, like a reflex almost. So there's not even a conscious thought necessarily that the defensive reflex. It's so ingrained in our bodies and our brains. And I just really appreciate him really delving into one of the ways that racism continues today and how it shows up specifically in America.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. I think I resonate a lot with those, those quotes and with a lot of the findings. And I think, again, I kind of am going to piggyback off your point because I think we tend to currently think in our day and age, oh, hopefully, if enough people hear the facts and enough people see enough terrible things going on in the world and we see a correlation, surely people will move to action. But the unfortunate aspect is that we have to emotionally believe it. And unfortunately, intergenerational trauma and intergenerational lessons that we learn teaches us these myths, these ideas that, yeah, Black bodies are completely invulnerable to damage, they are stronger than us, and that we are vulnerable. When in reality, we know and cognitively that is not true. And so the difficulty is how do you get the brain to connect with the body? And again, that does require, like the author mentions, processing trauma. And that is so hard. That's really hard. And I don't think that there are currently enough resources and care provided to have that structure to process trauma. It's easy to say it, but you have to have a safe space. You have to have the luxury of emotional bandwidth to be able to process it. But clearly it's needed because we are bombarded with so many facts, so many news stories, but this isn't doing anything, so we need to change our perspective and change our approach to it.
I know that one takeaway that I had in the book was that like racism not doesn't just live in the body, it lives in I mean, it lives in our body, not just in our mind, right? So eh, I feel like he does a really good job, the author does a really good job at explaining how like anti-blackness really shows up as like maybe fear or defensiveness, sometimes, especially like in white bodies, right? I know he goes into different like the white bodies and the black bodies and how they can carry trauma throughout generations and stuff. And I feel like us understanding, especially as social workers, how trauma and racism really lives within all of us on a deeper level, not just through like our conscious actions, but subconsciously too, and even like deeper within our thoughts. Um, I think it's very important for us to keep in mind when we're approaching different people in our field and stuff, and how to apply resources and really navigate them through different um struggles and stuff.
When I was reading this book, I brought up a lot of internal feelings for myself, things that I've gone through personally as a Black woman, and my own, I guess, biases that I've had growing up in a mixed race household with an Asian mom and a black dad, and it's very true about what Ashley was saying and the quote that she read, because I also really resonated with that. The quote where she said, especially the part where it said they can handle anything short of total destruction, but white bodies are extremely weak and vulnerable, especially to Black bodies. So it's the job of Black bodies to care for white bodies, soothe them, and protect them. And it's interesting because I saw this TikTok the other day of this lady, and she said she saw a teenage Black girl at the store, and then some random like little white kid came up to this teenage girl, and she said, and the little kid said, "If I'm ever lost, my mom told me to find one of you guys because you guys would help me." And it's putting that pressure onto Black women that they need to be the ones to be there to care for white people. Like, why did the mom say, find one of these people, why, one of these Black women? And it was a teenager too at that. And then just seeing like the burdens that's being held onto us and still being treated horribly, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, that's a good point because, I think another thing that I think I read in the book is that good intentions don't prevent harm. So I know sometimes when we are intending like we have good intentions for maybe an idea or a thought or maybe some um niceness, right? I think he mentions in the book how they can actually inflict more harm when we don't really realize it. So th those are some good points that you're making, Nikem. So thank you for sharing that.
Trauma is like held in our bodies and like also in our DNA. And so like it affects our development and the way that like we grow up, the traditions we have in our family, the stereotypes we may hold like consciously or unconsciously. And it's just like written all over us. And so like when we start to do the work to like start healing that trauma, it can be like so incredibly difficult because of how ingrained it is in us.
Yeah, I think another thing that I kind of like liberation requires collective healing, I guess, in a way. Like we
Mhm.
all have to come together to, I guess, like essentially create a change, right? We can't just individually do it or perfect like this healing, I guess. We all have to kind of just be conscious of our actions and really apply them into especially as social workers, right? Because like back to how like the whole good intentions may inflict more harm, right? We may have like our own individual subconscious biases or implicit biases that we might have and not really knowing it, but maybe collectively having these open conversations and challenging these ideas, we're able to identify them and identify our own like biases that we may have or maybe like these well intentions or well thoughts that we don't even realize may inflict a lot more harm than we expected, you know. Um, so yeah, I think really having these open conversations are super, super important and very crucial as social workers to try to be understanding of the population that we're working with.
Yeah, I agree. And I also, that's why I really appreciate like the cohort model. And so that like it's just so much easier to build community when we're around the same people every week. Um, and that like our views can be challenged in a really positive way to help us kind of open our mind to things that we might have not seen before because of our own positionality.
100%. Yeah, I think we're all very lucky that um, the way that our school works is that we're put into cohorts of about like 30 students or so, and we all take the same classes, same schedule, and so we really get to bond and get to learn things at the same pace and get to have these really rich discussions, and it makes community projects like this super easy and super fun and engaging. And actually, speaking of being informed of things that we wouldn't be informed of and getting to learn more, I wanted to throw it over to Nakem to maybe talk about what inspired our community project because, yeah, because you were really the captain of this in terms of like gathering information and interviewing people. So one, I just wanted to hear, your version of like what led you to learn about this and, maybe some things that maybe people wouldn't know about because we're not learning a ton about ICE and their actions today.
It was really random how I found out about this, but literally, I remember the exact day. It was October 2nd, 2025. I was in my field at my internship, and my field instructor got an email from her phone, and then she was like, "Oh my God, like this is so horrible." And I was like, "What's going on?" And she couldn't even like slow down. She was like, "I need to talk to somebody about this right now." So she left me alone for a bit. I was working on some stuff, and then she came back, and then she said, I asked her what was wrong, like what happened, and she said, Nikem, like, I just got an email from an immigration attorney saying that they're going to start sending letters to unaccompanied youth, like these really threatening letters to these unaccompanied youth, stating that they should self-deport for a monetary offer of $2,500 or face consequences, whatever consequences that may be. And then I'll just let it simmer for a little bit. But it's been in the back of my head for a while, and I really wanted to do something about it, but I just didn't know how to, especially because it's like so vague. And it was just one email that was sent to my field instructor. So I just simmered for a bit, let it simmer in my head for a little bit. I kind of brought it up here and there with my field instructor, but nothing really like ever became of it until we got this community project from Dr. Wang. And then that was when I brought it up to the group here. And then everyone was like agreed that we should talk about it. So then that's when I decided I should talk to my field instructor more about it. And I let her know we are doing a community project about this. And she was able to guide me to a bunch of resources. She had me speak with two immigration attorneys, and then there was one I couldn't get a hold of for speaking, but he was able to send me a bunch of news articles about this operation because it's not widely known, and the Department of Homeland Security is denying that this operation is even happening, which is so disgusting because they're targeting very vulnerable youth who are probably getting these letters in English and who probably cannot speak English or read English because they're immigrant children. It's called Operation Freaky Friday. Horrible that they took a very great movie series and turned it into something awful. And I do personally believe that they used that name purposely because if you look up Freaky Friday, what are you going to get? The book and the movie because it's so popular. And that was a very big barrier that I and my group mates here ran into when trying to research this. And it wasn't until that I had spoken to actual immigration attorneys who are dealing with this issue that I couldn't get any more information until I talked to them. So our project was bringing awareness about this topic and just spreading information because The Department of Homeland Security is denying this operation, but it's still happening. And also from my field instructor, she also sent me an email saying that Medi-Cal is releasing information about their, I guess, clients. I'm not sure if you call them clients, but she they're releasing information about these clients. And what worries me is that a lot of our foster youth in the system, if not all of our foster youth in the system, are under Medi-Cal. I mean, their information's already released, but it just takes something to like just go wrong. Like you could just be walking down the street and then just get picked up because you're a little Mexican kid or a little black kid or like just someone who doesn't look like white.
On one hand, I remember when you shared it with the group, and on one hand, I sadly wasn't that surprised just because, ICE operations and the way that it's accelerated since the new administration, it's terrifying and it's real and we're seeing it happen. And at the same time, it did surprise me. Or it's so blatantly discriminatory, I guess is the way to put it. Like Eva, I don't know if you want to go into it, but you found or you basically looked into what the mission statement of ICE is and just how it makes no sense with the current actions. So I don't know if you want to talk about it a little bit.
Okay, this is the ICE's mission statement according to their website. It says protect America through criminal investigations and enforcing immigration laws to preserve national security and public safety. And so essentially, through this mission statement, they're justifying the increase of arrests in individuals and minors with no criminal history or records. They're encouraging the deportation of minors through this monetary incentive. And essentially, I feel like all of ICE is kind of going back to like their harmful strategies. Not that there ever weren't any harmful strategies, but like this kind of large scale raids happening in our communities that are targeting minors.
I feel like, and also to add on to that, I feel like, the media is really like showing a lot of the different things that is going on with ICE and really talking about a lot of policies that is happening with them. And, it really starts to feel like it's less about safety and more about managing the fear that's going on in our communities. And that fear, I feel like with the media is really getting validated instead of challenged, which is super wild because I feel like media plays such a big role in like how like the images of raids and the mugshots and words like criminal and it all activates like something like going back to like the body and like the trauma and how we have these like different trauma responses to different things and messages that are being put out there. So it's just really it's crazy to see how everything ties back into, um kind of like what the story is talking about intergenerational trauma and then just kind of seeing how things are playing out in real time and in real situations and scenarios and watching real communities of color being impacted in different ways.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, we wrote a paper together as a group as well. And one of the pieces that, we want to emphasize within the goals and the whole point of the community project is to go against the mainstream narrative. And so, like Trinity mentioned, like Nakem mentioned, it's the mainstream message is ICE is scary, they're out for everyone, we are powerless to stop it. And look at how they're deporting all of these pe innocent people, or at least that's maybe the mainstream message that we are receiving within our area and our algorithms, right? Other people, I'm sure, are getting different messages. The goal of our activism and our community project would be to go against the mainstream messages as much as possible. So finding ways to empower those that are going to be vulnerable and empower communities. We are not going to get the hopeful stories as nearly as often in terms of people actually working against ICE and being successful. We're going to get so many more stories that promote the power of ICE. But again, I'm grateful too for Eva for reading up that mission statement as well, because like they claim, this is supposed to protect the national security. And what threat are we protecting America from? And tying it all back to my grandmother's hands, this idea of racial minorities are a threat. We are vulnerable now as white bodies if we keep having these bodies here, and they are going against the law. And really, what threat are they enacting? That's the question. And ultimately, they are saying, doesn't matter. We're not going to answer it. We're just not even going to talk about it. But yeah, I wanted to throw it over to Ashley too to quickly maybe talk about maybe some of the potential actions that we're thinking of in terms of ways that we would love to follow through on this community project.
In our original presentation, you guys covered obviously community organizing, getting the information out, doing this podcast was a big thing, letting the community know that this exists. Because if it weren't for NICEM, we wouldn't know that this operation was happening. I mean, we know what is happening with ICE in the country in general, but specifically for the unaccompanied minors. We talked about having a tent at San Jose State. There are a lot of immigration organizations that have trainings online for Know Your Rights, to teach not only immigrants, but just anybody who wants to know their legal rights in case they happen to um, come across an ICE agent. It's important that they understand what is and what isn't legal. We can protect these vulnerable communities, and especially the children. They offer community resources and toolkits. There's also State of California funds immigration law firms to provide free legal services for unaccompanied minors. I know there's tons in the Bay Area. They're all over California. The one that is on the top of my head is it's called Kind Kids in Need of Defense. That one's located in San Francisco. So if you know money is a barrier, which it usually is, they offer free legal services. I think just having these sort of like open conversations, and even like within our own internships, talking about it with staff, administrators, seeing, hey, can I post this flyer up in the school bulletin, just so people know when this is happening, that there's resources available for free, offer a sense of support for our community at this time. I think that the downside is that it's once ICE has a child or an individual in custody, it's really hard to get a hold of them. It's been hard for people to track them. Even attorneys are having a hard time finding their clients. So prevention and strategies for how to keep kids safe and our community safe, I think, is the best. Really, the only way right now that we can prevent that.
Like Nick Kim mentioned, like Ashley just mentioned, the reason why this is so hard to navigate and move in terms of action is because there's little information out there on purpose. They don't want us to know how they're moving, why they're moving. They don't want us to contact the people that are victims of this. And that's horrible. And in general, too, there's still misinformation everywhere, I imagine, in terms of just even ICE operations to begin with. And so I kind of wanted to throw to the group a general question, which is like, with the idea of, what if ICE was doing the same thing but to white children? Would there be an uproar? Would there be more resources provided? Probably. So I guess maybe asking that question of how do we see white supremacy intertwined with the lack of inaction in terms of community responses, or the action that is taken, in support of ICE, or, action that's done for these communities.
I mean, I feel like it just goes to show that they're silencing voices. They're silencing people. I don't want to say just Black voices because it's not just Black voices, but it's like non-white voices that they're silencing, especially kids who have their whole lives to like make these decisions for themselves, and they're seeing what's happening to their parents, right? So they're probably going to grow up and, to try and maybe fight the system. And I know that's not what they want, like white supremacy is having, the white body be at the top of the ladder and then everyone else is at the bottom, if that makes sense. And yeah, they're going after some of the most vulnerable groups of people right now, which are kids, ages 14 and up. And there is possibility that that age limit will go down to 10 years old. Just imagine a 10-year-old getting that letter with some really confusing legal language that they can't even read because they're 10. And not to like knock on today's generation, but when I was a teacher, some of these 10-year-olds can't even read.
I mean, even if a kid, highest education at 10 years old, can read, the likelihood of them understanding the legal jargon, the complications, like if adults don't understand this, how are kids going to know this, right? It seems impossible. And I think that all ties back to the quote, which was that this idea that Black bodies are invulnerable. White supremacy is also about Latinx, Asian bodies. And what's interesting about that quote is it's not saying, oh, Black adult bodies, Black adult this gender bodies, or what have you. It's just saying Black bodies. It doesn't matter the age. It doesn't matter anything. It's just if they're Black or if they're Latinx or if they're X and they're not white, then they're invulnerable. So I think what's terrifying is that on this end of protecting the country and protecting immigration law, we are now concluding somehow that Latinx children, who maybe even are American citizens, are somehow a danger to this country and invulnerable to damage and trauma. I personally don't see the connection. But the connection is, as we've talked about, cognitively, it doesn't make sense. It's not meant to. It's all intergenerational trauma, as well as an individual responsibility to process said trauma and not just stand idly by. But if I throw my own 2 cents in there, it is scary to think about trauma and to have to relive it and to process it. So rather than process and relive it and have more humility, like, oh, maybe I need to do something, it's like, that seems out of my depth. I don't know what's going on. I don't kind of want to know what's going on. I'll just let it happen. Plus, I'm feeling safe anyway by not thinking about it or doing anything about it, which is really scary. But I think that's maybe the point of the book is like, you know what? We need to do some more work on ourselves. And it is meant to be a collective community, but also some of that work is we got to start ourselves, I think was what I took away from it. But maybe one last thing I want to throw out there is obviously we want to use this community movement in a way that goes against mainstream messages. We want our community project to be something that's not just another doomsday, megaphone. We want it to be something that's encouraging. And we also want to implement the lessons that we've learned from my grandmother's hands and just the social program in general, saying we don't stand for white supremacy and anti-Black racism. What are some ways that we feel like we can effectively intertwine all the things that we've learned, especially from my grandmother's hands, into our activism to make our community project stand the test of time?
I like to think of it in terms of micro, meso, macro. There's a purpose for action at each level. And the micro level is the individual. And that's going to be where the anti-racism trauma work happens. Nobody can do that for anybody else. It's up to that person. And of course, we can utilize community and peer support for that. But ultimately, it is an individual process that needs to happen. The more that we talk about, destigmatize therapy, trauma work, anti-racism, I think the less defensive, at least within our own communities, we can sort of like call people in to that work. Menachem says he talks a lot about regulating the body, and even in community spaces, regulating the body is how you're going to bring people in. And so that's really the micro individual work, is that regulating trauma work, which then can lead to harmonization with the meso and the macro systems.
Yeah, I like that perspective. Like it's trying to approach it from all levels because all social movements have causes and symptoms within the government institutions, within our communities, within ourselves, right? So it's like we're thinking micro, then we need to address the trauma of why we're responding or not responding to these news. What are some ways as a community level that we can gather support and care? Like one of the long-term goals would be to set up a network of refuge homes for those that feel vulnerable and scared. So that way, if they don't feel like they want to walk home or they don't want to wait for the school bus, then they can have a safe home to go to. So at a community level, what are ways we can intervene? And at the macro level, I mean, even beyond voting, it's like lobbying, it's protesting, it's maybe even working in the government to try to make a change directly and trying to approach it from all three levels rather than going, what can we do to put band-aids on bullet holes? That's ultimately the goal.
And one of the quotes from my grandmother's hands that really stood out to me was, I'll read it. Bringing a settled body to any situation encourages the bodies around you to settle. Bringing an unsettled body to the same situation encourages other bodies to become anxious, nervous, or angry. And so, like, really taking that into consideration when we're sharing information, especially about ICE and Freaky Friday operation, and making sure that, like, we're not sharing it in a way that, like, instills this panic in others, even though it's totally panic inducing, but just being really mindful of like the way we're showing up to present this information. And I think that this can be like applied to like all situations in social work as well, like in our internships, in our classes. I just think it's a helpful framework to remember that we need to bring a settled body in order to like instill change.
Yeah, I wanted to add on, um, because I've been thinking very heavily about this, and I did want to base my practicum community project around this as well. So an idea that I had come up with, because I feel like, being in the county, being in DFCS, I can already try to make some sort of macro level movement. So what I was thinking of when I wrote up in my report or my proposal, sorry, was having like a resource packet and then I want this also targeted towards, it could be for anyone of color, but I'm targeting specifically like youth of color who might get these letters and not know what they're talking about. So in this resource packet, it would, like it would it's hard because of the nature of the issue. Would say something along the lines of you might be getting a letter that might be very confusing, that might use coercive tactics to get you to leave the country. Um, but in that packet, I also try to point out what those coercive tactics might be. And it's like also really about empowering these kids know that they have rights. They have the power to not sign any like weird documents that they might not understand. They have a right to an attorney. Um, and like when you get that letter, it's not the end all be all. There are things that you can do. Um, I would also like to put some different like resources that they could contact in that packet, like California Youth Connections, which is based, actually, I'm not too sure where it's based, but my field instructor brought it up for me as a good resource. They would also be able to help spread the word about this operation, and also support kids who might need documentation or being able to get grant special immigrant status. I think that's what it's called. Also the Rapid Response Network as well, which is based in San Mateo County specifically. They would do the same things as California Youth Connections, but within San Mateo County.
Yeah, that's awesome, Nakem, and I really appreciate you for sharing the fact that you wanna sorry, that you wanna like create information and share the information too, because I know one thing that I've always heard throughout, like my life and just people commenting and stuff is that knowledge is power, and I feel like when we are put in these situations where we're not really too sure of what to do or where to go or who to trust, like the one thing nobody can take away from us is our knowledge, and I really feel like that's one thing that I appreciate about our community movement project is that, our goal is to shift people's mindset with knowledge, and overall like try to and with that knowledge and that information that we're trying to provide is reduce like the harm and promote the safety in our communities and stuff. So yeah, I just want to take a moment to appreciate everyone for gathering knowledge and trying to, put it out into our communities so that we can try to reduce that harm overall into our communities and stuff.
Yeah, thanks so much, Trinity. Thank you so much, Nikem. I mean, Nikem, that community project sounds awesome, and I can't wait to see what comes out of that. Yeah, and thank you so much to everyone who watched this all the way to the end. We're grateful for you all listening. And as well as all the resources are going to be linked in the description below. And so I'll make sure to have all those in there. And yeah, hopefully, anyone who's watching, I hope you know that you are supported, that there are resources to help you. You're not alone in this, and there's going to be change coming. This is not going to be the norm. It will be changing for the good. So yeah, thank you so much.